The execution square of the Zorzel homeworld was vast, an arena built from smooth obsidian-like stone that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The sky above was a deep, bruised violet, with the twin suns hovering low on the horizon, casting elongated shadows of the alien enforcers standing in disciplined rows. Daniel Reese stumbled as they dragged him forward, his arms bound behind his back with energy restraints that crackled with each reluctant movement. The chains were designed to keep his muscles locked in place, but the enforcers still yanked him as if they enjoyed the control. His feet were bare against the cold stone, leaving a trail of smeared blood from the wounds he had suffered in their interrogations. Towering above him were the Zorzel enforcers, their insectoid exoskeletons glistening with iridescent colors that shifted under the artificial lighting. Their elongated, multi-jointed limbs moved with unsettling precision, each step clicking against the stone floor as they escorted their prisoner toward the towering execution block. The crowd of aliens gathered in the massive arena was silent, thousands of glowing eyes fixed on the last known human in existence. They came from various species under the Dominion, some reptilian, some amorphous, others floating as pure energy encased in containment fields. All of them were here for the same reason, to witness the final erasure of humanity. A deep, resonant chime rang through the air, signaling the arrival of the Arbiter. From a towering archway at the far end of the execution square, the massive figure emerged, Judge Krithis, the enforcer of galactic law. Krithis was an ancient Zorzel, his chitinous body layered with ceremonial plating that shimmered in the light. His 6 burning cyan eyes locked onto Reese with the dispassion of a scientist observing an insect before dissection. With deliberate grace, the Arbiter ascended the levitating dais that hovered above the execution block, his voice amplified by unseen technology. Daniel Reese of Earth. The Arbiter's voice echoed across the arena, rumbling like an avalanche. You stand accused of the most grievous crime recorded in the archives of the Galactic Dominion. The thousands of aliens in attendance remained deathly still, their collective attention fixed on the proceedings. The Arbiter continued, his words laced with absolute finality. Your species, known as humanity, has been deemed an aberration, an unpredictable, violent force of destruction that has proven itself incapable of assimilation. The Great Tribunal has ruled that your kind is beyond redemption, and thus, the only recourse is complete erasure. A murmur rippled through the audience, though it was not of dissent, rather, it was a silent agreement, a shared acknowledgement that this sentence had been inevitable. Daniel lifted his head, his face bruised and blooded, but his eyes still burned with defiance. He did not cower. He did not beg. The Arbiter's 6 eyes narrowed slightly, observing the human's demeanor. The Zorzel had studied humanity for centuries, dissecting their psychology, their tendencies. They had expected fear, regret, perhaps even desperate pleading. But not this. Not this quiet defiance. Humanity waged war against the stars, refusing to submit to unity, to order. Krithis continued. Your people chose chaos. You refused peace. And so, the tribunal ruled that your kind must be eradicated for the greater stability of the galaxy. And now, you are the last. Daniel exhaled slowly, letting the words wash over him. It wasn't the first time he'd heard them. He had been told the same thing during his countless interrogations, how his people had been hunted, system by system, colony by colony, until there was no one left. The Arbiter gestured toward the execution block, a massive slab of metal laced with energy emitters designed to reduce organic matter to molecular dust. Your extinction shall be completed here, now, before the eyes of the Dominion. The enforcers shoved him forward. Daniel barely managed to keep himself upright as they forced him onto his knees before the block. The energy restraints hummed louder, tightening their grip, ensuring there would be no resistance. A silent hush fell over the arena. The moment had come. Judge Krithis raised a clawed hand, signaling the executioner to activate the disintegration array. The air hummed as the weaponized energy field prepared to fire, ready to erase the last human from existence. Then, for the first time since the trial had begun, Daniel spoke. His voice was hoarse but unwavering. You have no idea what you've done. The murmurs returned, louder this time. Some of the alien spectators glanced at each other. What did he mean? Judge Krithis tilted his head slightly, his 6 eyes flickering in intrigue. Explain your meaning, human. Your fate is sealed. There is nothing left to say. Daniel let out a weak, dry chuckle. He coughed, tasting blood, and then smirked up at his executioner. You think you wiped us out? You think it's over? A shiver ran through the gathered crowd, though none of them could explain why. The enforcers, trained to detect even the slightest shifts in psychological behavior, took a step back. Daniel exhaled, letting his words settle in the air like a slow-burning ember. Then, with an eerie calm, he continued. We were never just one species. We were a virus. A program. A failsafe. The execution array powered down with a sharp crackle as Krithis abruptly lowered his hand. The Arbiter's massive frame loomed forward, his crystalline exoskeleton catching the shifting light. His 6 eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Reese. Elaborate. Daniel's smirk widened. Despite the pain in his body, despite the fact that death was mere moments away, he still held the one thing they had never understood about humanity. Hope. And now, fear. The moment my heart stops, he whispered, every ship in this system will receive an ancient, buried signal. A signal from the ones who made me. And trust me, he leaned forward, his bruised lips curling into a wicked grin. They're already on their way. A ripple of unease spread through the gathered crowd. The enforcers exchanged glances, shifting on their many limbs. The Arbiter, for the first time in centuries, hesitated. Then, above them, the sky darkened. It was not the coming of night. It was not the passing of a celestial body. The stars themselves began to blink out. One by one. Something was coming. Something vast. Something ancient. The air grew heavy, vibrating with an energy that none of the Dominion's greatest minds could explain. And then, a sound. A deep, mechanical shriek. The first warning of what lay beyond the veil of known space. And Daniel Reese, the last human, only smiled. The execution square was silent, unnervingly so. Not even the whisper of the wind dared disturb the moment. Daniel Reese, kneeling before the tribunal of the Galactic Dominion, watched as unease crept into the expressions of his captors. His words had taken root in their minds, spreading tendrils of doubt through the rigid structure of their thoughts. We were a failsafe. That single sentence had disrupted the absolute certainty of the Zozel and their allies. The High Arbiter Zyphar, standing tall on his levitating dais, regarded Reese with something dangerously close to hesitation. Explain. It was not a request. It was a command. Reese, blooded and bound, simply smiled. Oh, you're already seeing it, aren't you? His voice was quiet but carried through the execution square like a blade sliding free from its sheath. Zyphar's crystalline form pulsed. Information flooded into his neural pathways, anomalies, disturbances in the system, inexplicable energy readings. His species, the Zozel, prided themselves on their control, their knowledge. And yet, something was happening that defied all precedent. Reese tilted his head toward the ochre sky. You thought you wiped us out. Thought you'd erased us from existence. But you never stopped to wonder if that was exactly what we needed you to do. The executioners, towering enforcers clad in exoskeletal armor, shifted uneasily. They were trained to be impervious to doubt, to act with absolute certainty. And yet, for the first time in countless cycles, an emotion foreign to their kind slithered into their minds. Dread. Above them, the sky flickered. Not in the way of a passing storm or the shifting of planetary cycles. It was deeper than that. Wrong. A ripple of darkness coiling within the light. A shrill tone cut through the air, urgent, panicked. The High Arbiter's internal command system flared with warnings. Anomaly detected. Unidentified energy signature approaching planetary orbit. Multiple objects inbound. Unrecognized origin. For the first time in eons, the High Arbiter hesitated. He turned to his second-in-command, a creature of pulsing organic metal. Deploy planetary defenses. Now. But before the command could be executed, the sky tore open. A sound, ancient and abyssal, rolled through the heavens like the groan of a sleeping god awakening. The tribunal, the enforcers, and the gathered audience of alien dignitaries turned their gazes upward, witnessing something they could not comprehend. Vast shapes emerged from the void. They were not ships in the conventional sense, not constructs of metal and propulsion, but shifting, amorphous titans that flickered between dimensions. Some were obsidian monoliths, others impossible fractals that twisted perception itself. And at their core, a deep, throbbing glow pulsed like the heartbeat of an unseen horror. The tribunal's data system screamed with incomprehensible readings. Unknown classification. No match in galactic archives. Communication attempt, failed. Then, in the very heart of the Dominion's most sacred city, the first of the behemoths descended. The air ignited with raw energy as something beyond understanding touched the surface of the world. Buildings designed to withstand cosmic warfare shattered as if they were made of brittle glass. Waves of gravitational force rippled outward, sending some of the lesser beings in the audience collapsing in agony. Sci-Fi's mind burned with a single, terrifying realization. They hadn't destroyed humanity. They had summoned something far worse. Reese, still kneeling, lifted his head to the sky, feeling the resonance of something ancient, something vast, something humanity had left behind. "You wanted us gone," he murmured. "But you never asked what would come next." The first of the entities moved, a towering specter of shifting matter. A deep, resonant pulse rang through the atmosphere, not words, not sound, but understanding. A signal, sent across the ether of space and time. A simple truth. The last human has fallen. The awakening begins. Reese's smirk widened. He leaned forward, whispering just loud enough for the High Arbiter to hear. "Welcome to extinction." And above them, the darkness descended. The moment the rift fully opened, reality itself screamed. The Tribunal's most advanced sensory networks, designed to monitor fluctuations across the known universe, failed spectacularly. Data streams corrupted instantly, reducing to nonsense. Algorithms that had successfully mapped the cosmic forces of 1,000 civilizations now collapsed under the weight of something far beyond comprehension. For the first time in recorded history, the laws of physics, the fundamental constants that held together the Dominion's reign, began to bend. Time did not flow correctly. The execution square, once filled with the towering figures of the Tribunal's elite and the silent, watchful presence of enforcers, fractured. Some figures froze in place, their bodies locked mid-motion, while others looped through the same seconds again and again, their actions repeating like broken reflections in shattered glass. The golden light of ZalZYR Prime's sun flickered between brightness and shadow, as though the celestial body itself was undecided about its own existence. Then, the sky split apart. It did not shatter, nor explode, nor ripple like before. Instead, it peeled back, as though something behind reality had reached out and torn away the veil. And through that hole in existence, they came. The Tribunal had no words for them. They were not ships. They were not life forms. They were something else entirely. Some took shape, vast obelisks of dark, pulsating matter, their surfaces rippling with the echoes of unformed galaxies. Others remained formless, existing between dimensions, flickering in and out of sight. Some of the more primitive beings in the Tribunal's audience fell to their knees, sobbing, their minds breaking under the sheer impossibility of what they were witnessing. And yet, these were not mindless destroyers. They had not come to conquer. They had come to correct. High Arbiter Zyphar, leader of the Tribunal, the one who had ordered the extermination of humanity, stood frozen. His crystalline form flickered erratically, his neural processors struggling to comprehend the data he was receiving. Across his vision, error messages flooded in faster than he could process. Unknown classification. No match in galactic archives. Communication attempt, failed. Attempting to engage planetary defenses, failed. All systems, failing. Panic. True, unfiltered panic. A concept that had never existed for the Tribunal before. Zyphar turned his gaze to the human, Daniel Reese, the last of his kind. The being who should have been insignificant. But Reese was no longer kneeling. The shackles designed to hold him in place had disintegrated, not through any physical force, but as if the very fabric of their existence had decided they were no longer relevant. The enforcers, towering figures clad in indestructible armor, had backed away. Their hands trembled. They were trained to be impervious to fear. And yet, they had never encountered this. "You feel it, don't you?" Reese's voice was calm. Not mocking. Not angry. Simply stating a fact. Zyphar tried to speak, but his words failed him. "You thought destroying us was an end," Reese continued, stepping forward. "But it was a signal. The moment the last human fell, the countdown hit 0. And now?" He turned his gaze toward the sky. Toward the titanic, unknowable entities that had come through the rift. "They're here." The first pulse rang through the air. Not sound. Not a transmission. A concept. It was not spoken, but it was understood by every being present. The last human has fallen. The awakening begins. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the execution square. The Tribunal's enforcers collapsed, their minds unable to withstand the sheer force of the presence above them. Across the planet, entire cities fell silent as everything stopped. Then, the first erasure happened. The High Council building of ZalZYR Prime, a fortress that had withstood millennia of war, vanished. Not destroyed. Not vaporized. Simply gone. Not a single particle remained. Zyphar staggered, his glowing body pulsing in sheer horror. He could feel it now, Not just the destruction, but the undoing. This was not an attack. It was correction. Across the Dominion, entire fleets were blinking out of existence. Planets that had once burned with the light of civilization darkened, their histories erased, their footprints wiped from time itself. Not consumed. Unmade. Xiphar's neural system screamed. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "We are the tribunal. We are." "Nothing," Reese interrupted. His eyes, once dulled by exhaustion and pain, now glowed with something deeper. Something primordial. "You never understood what we were," he said softly. "You thought we were just another species. Just another race to conquer, to wipe away when we became too dangerous." Xiphar's body trembled. "We can negotiate," he choked out. "We can." "No," Reese said. His voice held no malice. "Only finality. You never had the chance to negotiate. You sealed your fate the moment you pulled the trigger on Earth. Because humanity was never just a species. We were a warning. A signal buried in the genetic code of our kind, in the whispers of our history. Something older than us made us this way. We weren't meant to last. We were meant to be erased. And when that happened, something else was meant to take our place." Reese looked up, gazing directly into the endless blackness above. And something looked back. The tribunal's fleets, its worlds, its legacy, everything they had built, everything they had conquered, was now disappearing. Not through war. Not through destruction. But through the slow, inevitable unraveling of a story that was never meant to exist in the first place. The tribunal's reign was over. The galactic dominion was crumbling. And the real architects of fate had arrived. Reese exhaled, turning away from the High Arbiter as the tribunal vanished behind him. He walked forward, his footsteps the only sound in the silence left behind. The void stretched ahead, infinite and unknown. But it did not frighten him. Because this was not the end. It was just the beginning. The silence that followed was deafening. Where once had stood the tribunal, the proud rulers of the galactic dominion, the architects of humanity's annihilation, there was now nothing. The grand execution square, the towering spires of Zal-ZYR Prime, the glowing monuments of a civilization that had reigned for eons. Gone. Not reduced to ruins. Not shattered by an explosion. Simply erased. The sky, which had once been a deep ochre, now stretched into infinity, swirling with colors that did not belong to any known spectrum. Time, space, meaning, all of it flickered in and out of existence, as though the universe itself was being rewritten. Daniel Reese stood at the center of it all. He was no longer shackled. No longer a prisoner, a victim, a man awaiting death at the hands of his conquerors. He was the last human. And now, he was something more. Slowly, he turned. The figures in the sky, the titanic, unknowable entities that had descended from the rift, had not left. They loomed above, vast beyond comprehension, their forms constantly shifting between dimensions. Some resembled colossal monoliths of black stone, pulsing with impossible energy. Others had no true shape at all, merely existing as fractals of thought, coiling and unraveling in ways the mind could barely process. They were the architects. The ones who had always been waiting. And now that humanity was gone, they had arrived. Reese took a slow breath, feeling something stir within him. A deep, resonant pulse that was not his own heartbeat. A connection. A voice, if it could even be called that, resonated through him, not spoken in words, but in understanding. "You were the signal." Reese didn't flinch. He understood now. "Yeah," he murmured. "I know." Memories that were not his own flooded through him. Visions of the past. Of a time before human history, before even the rise of the tribunal. A time when the architects had walked among the stars freely, before something locked them away. Before the cycle began. Humanity had never been a mistake. Never a random occurrence. They had been planted. A species created with a single purpose. To die. And in their death, to break the seals that had kept the architects at bay. The tribunal, in their arrogance, had believed they were gods. That they had ended a species. But they had only done what was necessary. And now, they were undone. Reese tilted his head. So what happens now? The architects did not respond in words. They simply moved. The unraveling spread. Across the galaxy, entire planets ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply forgotten by the universe itself. Entire civilizations that had stood for thousands of years blinked out of time, their histories unwritten. Stars flickered and died in an instant, their light never having shone. The tribunal had once ruled 1,000 worlds. Now, none of them had ever existed. Reese closed his eyes as the weight of it settled over him. He should have felt grief, rage, despair. But he didn't. Because something deep inside him whispered that this was right. Humanity had not been the first. And they would not be the last. He opened his eyes and looked upon the new universe taking shape. A place beyond the dominion of the tribunal, beyond the constructs of those who had claimed to be gods. The cycle had ended. Something new was beginning. The architects shifted, their forms flickering between realities. The rift above them began to close. The corrections had been made. The tribunal was gone. The dominion was undone. And yet, Reese remained. Slowly, he looked down at his own hands. The flesh was still there, still his, but something else pulsed beneath it. Something ancient. Something not human. His existence should have ended along with the rest of his species. And yet, he was still here. His breath hitched. He could feel it now, the connection, the pulse of something deeper than time itself. He was no longer just Daniel Reese. He was the last remnant of the signal. A final thread in the vast, cosmic design. And the architects were watching. They were waiting. For his choice. Reese swallowed. So that's it, then? He asked quietly. You just erase everything? Wipe the board clean? A moment of stillness. Then, a response. It was never a board. Reese exhaled, rubbing his jaw. It was strange, after everything, after the loss, after the destruction, after the unraveling of reality itself, he didn't feel empty. He felt free. For the first time in history, there was no dominion. No tribunal. No oppressors. No wars. Just possibility. Reese glanced at the sky, at the swirling remnants of a universe being rewritten. He could feel the pull, the inevitability of it all. He could step forward now. Let himself be taken, become a part of whatever came next. Or, he turned his gaze downward. There was still something left. A fragment of what had been. A space untouched by the unraveling, waiting for something, for him. He clenched his fists. Maybe the cycle's over, he murmured. But that doesn't mean I have to disappear. The architects shifted. The weight of their attention fell upon him, a silent question hanging in the air. Would he step into the unknown? Reese smiled. Let's see what comes next. And with that, he took a step forward. And reality shifted once more. As the last remnant of humanity, as the final echo of a species that had served its purpose, Daniel Reese walked into a new existence. And the architects watched, as something truly new began.